I actually think it fits nicely with what we were talking about previously. It's help your team understand their roles and responsibilities, being clear about that, make sure that you're not the bottleneck, embrace learning, encourage people to speak up, to share mistakes that they've made, share research findings. And I like what you added too around just encourage that contribution to be cross-functional. So you have different stakeholders contributing their learning as well. The reward, don't punish is also quite key. Reward people for speaking up, for sharing those goofs and those mistakes, and to take that time to acknowledge and celebrate those micro moments, because those often can build up and just be the catalyst for change. And then, don't settle for the status quo.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Product Weekend podcast. I'm your host, João Moita, and I'm thrilled to kick off Season 3 with all of you. This season, we're focusing on the importance of psychological safety in product teams. Over the next several episodes, we'll be speaking with top product leaders from around the world, as well as psychologists and coaches to dive deeper into this critical topic. To start things off, we have a phenomenal guest with us today, Diana Stepner. Diana is a seasoned product leader with over 20 years of experience across startups, enterprise organizations, and nonprofits. She's currently a leadership coach, advisor, teacher, and a strong advocate for psychological safety in teams. Today, we're going to explore her journey, her insights on creating safe and innovative work environments, and the practical strategies she uses to foster psychological safety in her teams. Before we jump into the conversation, I want to remind you to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen, and please leave us a review. Your feedback and support really helps us improve and bring you the best possible content. Now, let's dive in. So, to start with, I'd like to ask you something we've been asking, even in the previous seasons, about what's a recent weekend that you really enjoyed?
A recent weekend, so I live in San Francisco, and we go to wine country on, for the day to go wine tasting, that type of thing. But a couple times a year, we go to a small town called Anderson Valley. And in Anderson Valley, there's even smaller area called Boonville.
Okay.
And so 2 weekends ago, we went to Boonville, and we stay in this not really remodeled, but it's basically a trailer, kind of mobile home thing. And they've got this outdoor enclosed area where we have a dog, and he can just, go out and explore,
Awesome.
in this enclosed area. So we don't have to worry about him. It's right downtown Boonville, so we can walk and go to some wineries, to do wine tasting.
Nice.
And it's just really relaxing, really nice. And that was 2 weekends ago, and it was just lovely.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds amazing. It's actually a challenge. I have a dog 3 years old now, and it's always a bit tricky to manage with the holidays and going places. But something like that sounds super lovely.
Oh, yeah. I love it.
Awesome.
So does the dog.
Cool. Let's start then with the basics and going a bit into the topic of psychological safety. I'd like to start with, what's your current definition of psychological safety? How would you describe that?
Yeah, so to describe it, I always follow along with Amy Edmondson. I think, she's one of the founding voices behind psychological safety. And so she has a definition that goes, psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. That is usually what I'll start with when I talk about psychological safety. She's got, the quotes or imagery you can find around that are just a really great one. But why not follow the person who started the whole movement?
Yeah, no, it's definitely maybe the biggest reference on the topic. And another thing that she emphasizes is that it happens on a team level. I find that concept also very important when discussing this, because it's not organization-wide and out of nowhere. There's psychological safety everywhere. It's really the element of, it's the on the team level that you really feel this. Cool.
Very true.
Let's talk a little bit about your career. So I'm curious, you have a remarkable career in product management with over 20 years in many different companies, different responsibilities, different types of companies. You were also in a charity, what's non-profit work
Non-profit,
also.
yep.
So yeah, I'd like you to give us a brief overview of your career,
Sure.
not in too much detail, but just also emphasizing some pivotal moments that changed your perception of this topic of psychological safety and its importance. Do you think we could run through it?
Totally. Yeah, for me, I'm like I said, I live in San Francisco, but I'm from Cupertino, which is where a lot of technology happens. And my whole background's in technology. I've worked at startups, I've worked at enterprise organizations, I've worked at digital agencies, software consulting too, and lived in London for about 20 years. And I think having that cultural experience of working, overseas, and then when I was working in London, I worked for a startup and I was able to travel around the world. And then after, a couple iterations and things like that, I ended up at Pearson and led an innovation team and an emerging technologies accelerator inside the organization. And again, was able to work around the world. And so I think that experience really was pivotal to appreciate psychological safety. I didn't know what the term was, or I didn't think of it at that time. Yeah. But as my career evolved, as I moved back to the U.S., I think it definitely stuck with me that in order to have different voices feel safe to speak up, and that's something you experience when you lead a global team, that you can't just have one static approach and apply that to everyone. Different cultures have different nuances, interact differently, work differently. And so you need to be able to respect the individuals and get an understanding of them to be able to bring to light and the opportunities for them to excel. And so that really led me to appreciate just those cultural nuances that can either dial up or dial down the contributions across all the individuals in a team, which is foundational for psychological safety.
Yeah, for sure. And let me challenge you a little bit on that, on the concept of adapting to the individual needs of, the individual needs of the individual. Like, how do you do that in a company? Maybe let's use the example of a product management team that you have people from different cultures, but you also have like processes that you need to follow. And when you're designing or preparing these systems, processes, whatever you want to call them, how do you account for that diversity in people's backgrounds to make sure that it accounts for their specific needs and specific ways of working? Do you have any like general framework on how to approach that to ensure that you account for the diversity?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways I would answer. One of the basic ones is don't do things in the dark. And so when you're, developing processes, procedures, as you said, you want to be open about what you're doing. You want to be able to get input from different parts of the business, different individuals throughout. And that doesn't mean you just send it out there and say, comment. It means, give people the time and space to contribute. Some people, if you did just send it out there, will respond. Others won't. You need to be able to think about the different ways that people feel comfortable contributing and provide those methods. So when I lead a product or a project that, is starting from scratch, for example, I will have opportunities for individuals to contribute, locally. So have, sessions for people to be able to speak up. I'll also do a lot through, FigJam or Miro, where people can contribute ideas, just by adding a sticky note. So that will enable people who aren't as loud to be heard and have that equal voice too.
Yeah.
I'll also do, share outs for the company so individuals can see, what's happening and provide feedback along the way. So the more open you are about the approach, the process, the more ways that you allow people to give input and, listen to that input, I think it creates a more, safe space. The other thing that I think is key as well is how you do that. It doesn't mean you just put things out there and then stop. You need to think about how you're phrasing things. If you say, for example, do you disagree with me? People are going to feel kind of a little bit awkward.
Disagree.
Exactly. So you also need to think about the phrasing that you're using. If you make a mistake, admit it. Don't, hide from it. Not just the process itself, but also how you come across is key when you're trying to create that space where people feel, as you said, all equally able to contribute.
Yeah, I think also it's on the inclusivity and accessibility principles of like having different ways of like collecting input or gathering ideas, so that people that prefer other things can do it in a different way.
Totally.
Yeah, that's interesting. And something I've heard you talk about is this people first culture in product management. I wanted to understand, is it something specific and different from psychological safety in general? What is it about? Can you describe what it looks like in practice and why is it so important for teams?
Yeah, and I would say psychological safety is a part of it, but it is different. What I found leading a lot of teams is that people said I was unique, that I actually cared about them. I treated them as individuals. I listened to them. I respected them. That stood out to me just as I was looking at, feedback 360s, stuff like that. And I joined a couple of organizations where, the culture started, and was created by a founder and just changed when a new individual came in. And it switched from being, very employee engagement, people were just really motivated by the mission, and it switched to be very transactional. And people were just treated as transactions.
Okay.
And so that's where I evolved my way of leading to, think about the people, to think about ways that you can help them grow and develop. Think about, the opportunities when you're, creating a new project or you're doing road mapping or goal setting, thinking about ways to really enable people to contribute, to get them to be uncomfortable, but in a safe way so that they can grow and develop, and to treat them as actual people, not transactions. And when you do, they appreciate it. They tend to work harder. They tend to contribute more, and the company benefits, the customers benefit. And so I just saw that repeatedly again and again. And so that's the philosophy that I follow. If you treat people as people and enable them to grow and develop, to be heard, then they're going to contribute back more to the organization because the organization respects them. They respect the organization.
Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that basically it was something that you were doing without even having like a name for it or really thinking deep about it. And it's fun that the way we got into this topic of psychological safety was also a bit by accident, that we started receiving this feedback that it was unusually safe space that we were creating in our events and so on. And then we started digging deeper into it. And for me, it was always obvious, this thing of like making people feel comfortable, and some things that I was doing a bit instinctively. And then I started like breaking them down, and it's interesting that you had a similar path. And on this, I'm curious, so this for us happened, let's say, less than a year ago. For you, it was probably some years ago that you've seen this, that for you was obvious, but for other people were not. Did you see or feel a difference in the industry, let's say, in the last 10, 15 years on how people generally approach that? Do you feel like today talking about these topics and caring about the human is more common than it was before, or it's still very just in a few companies that are doing this well?
I think it ebbs and flows. When I was doing it originally, it just, as you said, it was instinctive, but it was something that I'd learned just by working internationally, to be able to bring together a community of people across an organization. As I did at Pearson, I needed to create a space where all different, nationalities, introverts, extroverts, etc., could feel comfortable contributing. So I did it instinctively because I knew there was so much talent that was there, and just there were different ways the talent would be surfaced. Then when I joined two organizations where it didn't exist, that's when it really stood out to me, because I just thought this is how everybody worked, because that's how, a lot of the people that I worked with in my prior organizations had. But when I experienced the opposite, that's what really then triggered me to be like, okay,
There's something.
this is something that I was doing that isn't just normal.
Yeah.
And I do believe that it was, putting people first, or even psychological safety, I think was something that people were espousing, especially during the pandemic, because you had all of these times where you're seeing into people's lives, into their homes, into their families, into their pets. And so doing so became more emotional. And I think that caused, a lot of people to think about how do we do, these interactions more in a more human way.
And be more conscious
that
about
I
it.
think really, I think that really did. And, that's when like Google, Project Aristotle was another one where, a lot of people learned about, psychological safety from there, where Google was trying to analyze, what made teams successful or more successful than others. And, they found, they all had these common characteristics, but the thing that stood out, was the psychological safety. And then with, the layoffs that happened, a couple years ago, about, last year, as well as, probably starting last year, as well as, with a lot of other companies, that psychological safety was impacted. And, people stopped feeling comfortable speaking up. And that's what I've heard most recently in, coaching that I do and facilitation that I do, that, from last year, and that seems to be the time frame that a lot of people, talk about when, all the layoffs happen, companies, pushed people to do more and more with less and less. People just started to break. And so I think there was an appreciation for psychological safety that arose, but I think now it's being impacted by, the economic changes around us and how companies are treating people.
I
just
think
now.
I mean, also not talking from my personal experience, but what I feel happens is when like the economy is good and companies have like extra money to spare, like there goes more budget into these things. But when times get rough and they need to cut, like this employee well-being and protecting psychological safety are some of the first things to go away. How can you...
It's sad.
It is indeed. And I was thinking like on these things happen more on a macro level, right? On a company level, that budgets are cut for these things. And maybe we've seen a lot of also this year product operations being cut and these kind of supporting roles being like their budgets being cut. How can you do it amidst this wave of cuts and people not investing so much in these things? How can you as a leader protect your team and ensure that at least on that team level you still have this safe space where people can open up without the fear of repression or humiliation?
Do it intentionally. So it's similar to creating culture. You got to create culture intentionally. And to me, that means, if you think about the roles and the responsibilities across your team, that really is a great place to start. And some leaders, try to put themselves at the center of all decisions. Everything must go through them. And that provides a window into your working style that conveys a lack of trust. And so if you step back as a leader, don't centralize all decisions with yourself. Instead, show that trust for your team, reinforce their contributions, not just now, but for the future too. that really helps. You encourage, people to feel they can bring forward ideas, bold ideas, different perspectives by helping them understand how they fit into, the team, the organization, etc. And as part of that, learning is key because, again, if you clarify the roles and responsibilities, people, they may have an area that they're going to naturally go to, but they can't just keep that information to themselves. They need to be able to, share that insight. And so you as a leader need to think about, when you speak up versus when you hold back, because that's a good barometer to start with. And if you can feel comfortable, then that's likely to create at least the starting point for your team to feel comfortable too. And, again, thinking about that learning when people are taking risks, especially is, product managers are always exploring what's next. So it's always risky. You've got to encourage your team to share, what went well, what went badly. You need to be able to, celebrate all of those different opportunities of learning. And I think Google's Aristotle was a great example of that. The teams that had the psychological safety where they were sharing the mistakes, they were learning from the mistakes, was what, set them apart from the other successful teams. And then, two other pieces. One is just building on, reward, don't punish. And so when people are sharing and, something didn't go well, don't punish them, encourage them, celebrate, the fact that they spoke up, celebrate the fact that they learned, celebrate the fact that they tried. Acknowledging that, I think, is really key as well. But you need to do it in an authentic way. I've seen some leaders, try to, create a space, but you notice them rolling their eyes, or you notice them on their phone, or you notice them just really not paying attention or acknowledging their team. So you also need to think about, when you say you're going to reward, all types of learning, make sure that you're doing it authentically and that you're actually present when you do that and when the opportunities present themselves.
Right.
And then the other piece is just don't settle for the status quo. I think especially now when there's so much change happening in, technology around us, that what worked in the past may not work again or may need to be adjusted. And, to push yourself out of your comfort zone and to do so in a way that helps your team, grow and challenge their own beliefs. And again, that goes back to, reward, don't punish, and always focus on learning and, creating those roles and responsibilities so people, have an understanding of the value they're contributing.
Yeah.
But you got to continue to revise it and iterate on it because of, just the changes that are happening around us. And if you do all of those things, I think, individuals feel appreciated. They feel that they're respected. They feel that they have value that they're contributing. That then makes the team more successful because they're always, improving based on the learning and the sharing of mistakes. And then ultimately the company thrives because the people are feeling, empowered. The teams are feeling that they can, take risks and challenges and explore. And ultimately the company benefits too.
Got it. Talking about reinforcing contributions, I want to take a quick break to highlight how important your feedback is for our growth and to allow us to keep bringing you this type of content for free. So, if you got something from the episode so far, I'd really appreciate it if you take 20 seconds to follow our show wherever you're listening and leave a 5-star review on Spotify or a like on YouTube. Your feedback helps us improve and ensures we bring you the best discussions. Now, back to more insights from Diana on fostering psychological safety in diverse teams. I wanted to go to one of your last points on when people don't deliver, like reinforce and celebrate the things that they did right and that they're learning. How do you balance this with like high performing to not fall into the thing of like failing and like not achieving targets all the time is fine kind of thing? That, I mean, if you do this maybe inauthentically and you just pretend that you're happy with it and try to move forward, maybe that's what leads to this kind of environment. But how do you see that? Or is it not like related, the two things? Like when someone in the team is really not delivering things day in and day out, how can you still celebrate something if your instinct would be like roll your eyes or be disappointed at that person? How can you address that effectively?
And for me, it's contribution. Like the
Mm-hmm.
types of scenario you've described typically are associated with individuals who are not contributing.
Mm-hmm.
They're not taking
Engaged.
actions.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not moving forward in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And where I'm focusing on is, individuals who are striving. They're
Mm-hmm.
still trying to achieve. They're, got those goals, those metrics in mind, but it's almost like a constant A/B test. Not
Mm-hmm.
everything works, but you're trying and
Okay.
you're aiming towards that goal. I think it's, continuous improvement. Those types of iterative cycles that we practice in product is what I'm
Mm-hmm.
referring to.
Yeah, right.
I
That's the
think what you
situations.
highlighted is, yeah.
Yeah, I'm rephrasing my question and focusing more on these cases when people are not engaged and not performing, and even like to the detriment or even being a bit toxic to the whole team, that the other people that are working like really hard to achieve those goals and see someone in the team that's not pushing forward. How do you address those kind of situations?
Yeah, when someone's not engaged, I try to lead with curiosity to
Mm-hmm.
understand what it is that they're feeling. I think, especially right now, people are feeling burnt out. They're feeling pushed to the limit and
Yeah.
beyond. And if that's the case, then it's really understanding, and talking to the person to see, is it, home? Is it the combination of work and life? What is it that's causing them to feel burnt out?
Right.
And, sometimes they may not have taken a vacation in the last year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also encouraging people to be human,
Yeah.
that you do need to take a break.
Yeah. So
But
it's caring for the team and caring for the people and being really,
yeah,
ask and
yeah,
curious about what's the situation that's causing that.
definitely.
Mm-hmm. And talking about this, I wanted to touch on something that you mentioned earlier, which was around being uncomfortable or having uncomfortable situations. And I wanted to dig a bit deeper into that because I think it's a important part of psychological safety, is being able to have those difficult conversations and those uncomfortable conversations, which in an environment of where psychological safety is not present, it will probably be not have that people will not have that conversation, or if it happens, it's probably with some screaming or something like that involved. So what's the importance of addressing these difficult conversations, and how do you do that to put people in a place that they may not be comfortable, but it's productive for the team?
Yeah, there are a couple techniques that come to mind.
We can get specific. If something comes
Yeah,
to mind, we can dive a deep
no worries.
deeper as well.
So I think one thing that definitely resonates with me, and probably with a lot of product people, is imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I find that when people feel uncomfortable or they're, even not performing, they feel that they're not qualified. They're feeling scared.
Right.
And so putting on my coaching hat, there are, techniques to use to help people, get an understanding around where that feeling may come from.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I often help people know is that you're not alone. There's a stat that, I've seen in a number of places. I think it came from Bloomberg. Around 82% of people feel imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a lot more people than we think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's quite common in product
Yep.
because if, like you said, like if someone had done it before, the product would already be out there. And so from a product management perspective, we're always doing things that are new. And that's just by its nature,
Yeah.
exciting,
In the
scary.
boundary of the known unknown.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like is that uncomfortableness. And, when I worked in the UK, a lot of people would use, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. When you're facing that SUD type of environment, you really can lean into it. And that uncertainty, becomes perseverance and the ability to continue to explore the unknown is something that I think really differentiates, strong product people. You've got that grit, you've got that tenacity. And I think Angela Duckworth came up with the word grit, but I think grit really powers product people, to set your sights in a goal and then work diligently and intelligently to get there. And so that to me is what you try to understand is how can you help the person become comfortable with that uncertainty. And when you're facing or working with someone who's feeling that they couldn't, step out and try something new, you need to understand why. But you can't lead with a why question because that often causes people to feel put on the spot. And, it's more of how would you approach this? What are some options to approach this? What are some obstacles we might face?
Yeah.
And so it's those how and what questions that really start to engage their brain. And you can often figure out ways to navigate around a tricky situation in a way that causes people to learn, okay, I can do this. I can do it again. And rinse and repeat.
Cool. Yeah, that's that particular thing of rephrasing whys as hows and whats. It's maybe the main outcome I took from the book. Maybe you read it, or at least you definitely heard about it from Chris Voss, the Never Split the Difference. That was one of the things that stuck with me the most from that one. Cool. And we were just talking about this. I just wanted to, I think we're getting to the conclusion that in product management in particular, psychological safety is key. But since you've also been on this psychological safety and coaching a bit more broadly, what are the traits of or the aspects of product management that make it so important to have psychological safety compared to maybe other roles or other areas where this may not be as critical as it is in product?
So, shared earlier too around product is always exploring what's next. We're always, doing things that haven't been done.
Yeah.
And so that's by its nature is scary. And if everything new, every exploration has to go perfectly, and that means it's going to be very narrow, the sphere that you feel that you can tread.
Yeah.
And incremental changes are great, but it's not going to cause, a new company to, take the world by storm. You need to be able to feel that you can push the limits, that you can, explore new things and make mistakes while doing so. And that really causes advancements. The other thing I think is also just a lot of mistakes spawn even better ideas and new ways to approach things.
Yeah.
And so if, you encourage that experimentation mindset and enable that to be one that's not just contained in your brain, but shared out across the team, then, again, you're creating more of a feeling of psychological safety. But from a product perspective, it's more likelihood that you're going to reach your goals and do something that stands out.
Yeah. And I think also the fact that it's critical to have inputs from all around, right? That you cannot just rely on one source of information, and you have people in your team that are too smart to be just doing one task, right? Engineers, designers, people that have critical thinking and that can spot problems, opportunities. So you need to create this environment with them to also take the most of their talent and capacity. And also eventually, like even with asking questions and understanding the customer, that we're always asking why, but not just about asking why, it's creating the environment for the answers to reach us. Because as we were saying, like, if we just ask, why did you do that? People will probably get defensive and not share openly. So it's probably also an important skill in this interaction with customers or trying to get feedback and insights to create this space with these people for them to be able to open up.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think from a user experience perspective, there's always the belief. And, it happens where if you ask people for information or how they did something, they're going to tell you what they think they want. They think you want to hear.
Yeah.
But if you ask them to describe their day or, what was it, that you did this morning or how did you go about this, then they're going to get more into a storytelling mode and you're going to get more authentic information.
Mm-hmm.
And like, as you said, the ability to create a space where people feel that they can, be themselves,
Mm-hmm.
not just do what they think you want them to do, but just be themselves. I think you get more out of a person because it's hard to always have a mask. It's hard to always try to be somebody else. And if you can feel safe being yourself, then you have much more capacity to do pretty amazing things.
Cool. Awesome. We are reaching the end of our time. I think we may need a follow-up some other time. But I wanted to ask you for specific tips or tactics or exercises that people can do. Maybe 2 or 3 that come to mind as some of the most effective ones or ones that you enjoyed or seen good results with teams. We don't need to get into all the details on the nitty-gritty. I think we don't have time for that, but just referencing a few so that people can also dive deeper into them.
Really like is retrospectives.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a common thing in product, but it's a really great way to gather learnings, to share learnings, and just be able to benefit.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I like them, especially now, is that they're more often done in FigJam or Miro. And so it's a place where everybody can contribute.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just the loudest voice, you give everybody a timer, put down all your thoughts and, X amount of time and all these sticky notes appear.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear from everybody because it doesn't have to, again, be that loudest voice. So I think retrospectives are great.
Mm-hmm.
The other way that I apply retrospectives is to do it even before the project starts.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's think about the future. If it's a year from now, what went wrong? What can we do to try to prevent it?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can do that, again, through FigJam or Miro. Again, do it in an open way that allows people to, think of things that they know from other projects or other experiences and put that out there so that you can prevent them or plan for them even before they happen. Cool. So that I think is really valuable.
Yeah.
There's, sorry.
No, go ahead, finish. I was going to have a comment, but finish first.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. There's a framework called RAID. So it's like the risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies. So that's a way that you can do like that pre-mortem type of retrospective is to have people do that too.
Right.
And then the last one is from, Tom Garrity from the Psychological Safety is, it's a grid essentially. You're looking at the team and how they feel now. How do they feel from a psychological safety perspective now? And where did they feel a year ago? And where do they want to be? And then those gaps help to identify areas or opportunities to make changes and improvements too.
Awesome. Yeah, I think retrospectives are really powerful. One thing, though, that I've noticed and I feel like many product managers or product owners face is that with like the flow of things and like just going sprint after sprint, things are more or less stable. There's no huge drama going on. Retrospectives, if they are done exactly in the same way all the time, end up being more of like just putting the same things over again and not really reflecting and just like getting done with it. How can you, if that happens to a team that you're managing, how can you revive retrospectives so that they have these more powerful and transformative impact?
There are different ways that come to mind. One is a visualization of a pirate ship.
Mm-hmm.
It's an image where there are like different numbers all over the place. And, there's some pirates that are like hanging from, the mast. There's some pirates that are, falling off the boat.
Mm-hmm.
But you ask people, how are you feeling? And then you choose the number.
Okay.
And so that will help understand, are you feeling like you're going to vomit? Are you feeling like you're going to see the stars? What are you going to do? And so
Yeah.
that also helps get some feelings out there.
Yeah.
The other one is just, elephants in the room. You help people, feel comfortable. Thinking about things that are not being said
Mm-hmm.
and, encouraging those to be put forward. So they're retrospectives, but they're different takes or techniques that you can use to encourage people to bring forward what they may be thinking, but not necessarily feeling okay to share.
Yeah. Not sure if you agree with me, but what I would take from this and also from this discussion is that as a product manager, for example, try different ways of doing it, and also relates to what we were talking earlier about how people feel most comfortable. If you have a retrospective every week or every 2 weeks, try new things, like bring something new to the next retrospective with some exercise. We did like more storytelling or fantastic themes around, can help people come forward with things that maybe are not being shared in just the regular, let's say, retrospective that ends up being just the same thing over and over. So if you feel that, maybe it's a good approach to try something new.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to it's not on you as the product leader to do all of these things. You've got amazing people working with you.
Yeah.
So also ensure that you're, inviting ideas and letting other people lead sessions, because everybody's going to have their own, unique spin on things. And that's great. Again, the diversity of voice also encourages a more safe space to be heard or, felt, experienced. And so again, don't put it all on yourself. You've got your team, you've got the cross-functional stakeholders that you work with always. You've got your customers. Think about other ways you can encourage people to contribute.
All right. Awesome. And anything that comes to mind besides retrospectives as a tactic or exercise that you would recommend?
Yeah, the one I was describing around psychological safety.
That how are you feeling?
Yeah, I
Great.
think that's a good one that's different.
Mhm.
Thinking about where you felt a year ago, where you feel now, where you feel in the, want to feel in the future. I think that's also a good tactic or technique. Yeah.
Awesome. And what's for product managers that aspire to become leaders and lead with this people first mindset that you were mentioning? What are some practical first steps that they can take to go in that direction and to start building this culture within their teams?
Yeah, I actually think it fits nicely with, what we were talking about previously. It's, help your team understand, their roles and responsibilities, being clear about that, make sure that you're not the bottleneck, embrace learning, encourage people, to speak up, to share, mistakes that they've made or research findings, and I like what you added too around just encourage that contribution to be, cross-functional. So you have different stakeholders contributing their learning as well. The reward, don't punish is also quite key. Reward people for speaking up, for sharing those goofs and those mistakes. And, to take that time to acknowledge, then to celebrate those micro moments, because those often can build up and just be the catalyst for change. And then, don't settle for the status quo. Continue to push yourself out of your comfort zone, but do so in a way that, acknowledges being uncomfortable is awkward, but you can definitely develop grit, perseverance from continuing to strive to do, and that grit can become the pearl.
Awesome. That's a great wrap up and sum up of the episode, actually. We usually in the first 2 seasons, we were doing the release notes at the end of the episode. You just did a perfect release notes of this conversation. Just one last thing. Who are 3 leaders that you look up to in psychological safety in product? or maybe not necessarily in product, but in product even better. Yeah, for people to read their work, or even for me to invite them to the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, Tom Garrity, definitely
Mhm.
from a psychological safety perspective, that's for me where just a lot of it came together. So really appreciate everything he's done, a lot of his work, a lot of his efforts. Yeah, just have been amazing. And then there's another person whose name I cannot pronounce, and I apologize, but it's Gustavo Rossetti.
Okay,
And
we can link in the show
he
notes.
yeah, and he's leads a group called Fearless Culture.
Okay.
And a lot of great points around just team collaboration, team experiences, and psychological safety. So really like his newsletters. And yeah, I'm one of those people. I do listen to everything, Lenny's podcast. So from a product perspective, I think he does a really great job just sharing and getting those product learnings out there. And, like you said, people commented about you. I mean, I think people feel safe talking to him. And not everything people share worked well. There's, goofs and mistakes along the way too. And yeah, I think it's a really great opportunity for product people to learn. It's hard, but the perseverance pays off.
Awesome. Cool. Awesome. Then let's close the conversation for today. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank
It was
you.
great having you. One last
Me too.
thing, if people want to connect or find you, where should they head to?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm, Diana S, I think is the last part of my LinkedIn. So you can find me there. I also have a Substack, dianastepner.substack.com, and it's People First Product Leadership.
Awesome. Cool. So people can also follow that newsletter. And yeah, thank you so much. It was great chatting, and we'll be seeing each other around.
Perfect.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining. And that brings us to the end of this insightful episode with Diana Stepner. I hope you found our discussion as enlightening as I did. Diana shared some incredible strategies and real-world examples that can help us all create a more inclusive and innovative environment. Thank you for tuning in. Please leave us a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, if you have more specific feedback or would like to share your thoughts about the topic, don't hesitate to reach out to me, João Moita, on LinkedIn, or drop an email at team@theproductweekend.com. Your feedback helps us improve and create better content for you all. Until next time, keep innovating and putting people first.